This channel does not promote or encourage any illegal activities. All contents provided by this channel is meant for educational purpose only.
SMTP Enumeration. In this video, we're going to be taking a look at how to enumerate as much information as possible from SMTP through the use of auxiliary modules. So first and foremost, what is SMTP? SMTP stands for the Simple Mail Transfer Protocol. This is a communication protocol that is used for the transmission of email. So for any of you who have used email before and have configured your own inboxes, you will be familiar with SMTP. Right now, SMTP uses TCP port 25 by default. However, it can also be configured to run on TCP port 465 and 587 if an SSL or TLS certificate has been set up for encryption, right? Now, we can utilize the various auxiliary modules available or that are afforded to us by the Metasploit framework to, number one, enumerate the version of SMTP that's running. And as I mentioned previously, the version information is going to come in handy during the vulnerability scanning section, and we'll be taking a look at how to, again, identify vulnerabilities for these services, or rather inherent vulnerabilities for these services. And again, so far what we've been doing is performing enumeration and then exploiting various misconfigurations to either obtain more information or to obtain some level of access. We can also utilize auxiliary modules to perform a brute force attack on SMTP in order to obtain or to find various user accounts on the target system. So that's one of the great things with SMTP, is that through the various auxiliary modules, we can also identify users on the target system, and this information can be very useful if we have a SSH open on the target, and we can then use that username to perform a brute force on SSH and then gain access via SSH. So again, in terms of SMTP, it really can provide us with much in regards to exploitation, unless we exploit the exact version of SMTP that's running on the target. However, we can use the information we gather from SMTP to stage our other attacks. So we'll be taking a look at all of this within the lab environment. So let's actually get started now. All right, so I am back in the lab environment. And again, starting off, we need to get the target IP, which we can do by typing in ifconfig. And the interface we're interested in is Ethernet 1. So we'll get our IP here, and the target IP is going to be the same subnet, but instead of a 2, it's going to be a 3. So I'm just going to copy that, and we'll then start up the PostgreSQL database service like so. And so service PostgreSQL, let me just type that in correctly. There we are. That's going to start it up for us so that we can utilize the Metasploit framework database. Once that is done, we can essentially start up the Metasploit framework console by typing in MSF console. Give that a few seconds to start up. All right, we can now add our workspace for SMTP enumeration. So we're going to say SMTP and then underscore enum, right? And we should have that as our active interface, or rather our active workspace. Now that that is done, we need to set up our global variables. So we're going to set up the global variable value for our hosts, primarily because we don't want to waste time, always setting the target IP for each module. Setting up the global variable for our hosts will again load up the target IP with whichever module we use. So again, paste that in and change the 2 into a 3, and that is set up. All right, excellent. So we can begin performing SMTP enumeration. So we can search for the various Metasploit framework auxiliary modules that are pertinent to SMTP. So again, we can essentially use a search filter like auxiliary to limit our results to only auxiliary modules. And then the name, we will specify SMTP. All right, so we get quite a few auxiliary modules, and the first one we want to take a look at is the SMTP version module, which will essentially just tell us what version of SMTP is running on the target. Now, again, as I said, SMTP may be configured to run on different ports, so I would recommend performing a port scan in order to identify what port SMTP is running on. But in this case, we do know through the lab environment that it is running on port 25. So we can then just load the module here. And if we show the options for this particular module, you can see that the rhost value has been set. The rport has been set to 25, which is the default, as I said. And you can then modify the threads value, which in this case we don't, because we're only targeting one target system. So we'll just hit run. And as you can see, it tells us immediately the version of SMTP that's running, which is postfix. And it also gives us the email address, or rather the domain for this particular SMTP server, right? Which again can be extremely useful as we move on to exploitation. However, in this case, we've already been able to enumerate or to get the version of SMTP, so we can again perform a search for the other SMTP modules. So I'll just use the previous search filter. And the next module that we want to take a look at is the SMTP enum module, which again performs user enumeration. So we'll copy that module and we'll paste that in there. And again, if you want to learn more about a particular module, just type in info. And as you can see, it gives you a description of what's going on or what this module is doing. So it says the SMTP service has two internal commands that allow the enumeration of users. So we can use verify, which will confirm the names of valid users, and expn, which reveals the actual addresses of user aliases and lists of email or mailing lists. Through the implementation of these, SMTP commands can reveal a list of valid users. So we can use this to enumerate user accounts, right? So we have the target IP set, the target port is set correctly. And again, we can also modify the Unix only option here. So this will skip Microsoft bannered servers when testing Unix users. And because we know we're dealing with a Linux target, the user file that we specify for the brute force is going to be the default Unix users.txt word list that's found under user share, Metasploit framework data word lists, and then of course Unix users. And we've used this before. So all we need to do now is just type in run. And again, it's going to begin the brute force. So give this a few seconds to a few minutes. It's going to take a while. All right, so the enumeration is complete. That took a few minutes. And as you can see, it's able to enumerate the various users on the system. So we have an admin account, administrator, backup, bin, daemon, as well as a few other interesting ones like the data user account, which again may provide us with an idea of what this server is set up to do. And again, all of this information can be very useful in staging other attacks. So for example, if we had SSH running on this server, then we could use these usernames to perform a brute force. And of course, having a username narrows down your brute force attack and makes it more efficient. So all of this information is extremely important. Now that's as far as we can enumerate in terms of SMTP. During the exploitation section, we'll be taking a look at how to exploit a vulnerable SMTP server. But for now, this should be it in regards to enumeration. So that concludes the lab demonstration. All right, so that is essentially SMTP enumeration through the use of the Metasploit framework auxiliary modules. And that also concludes the information gathering and enumeration section of this course. In the next section, which covers vulnerability scanning, we'll be taking a look at how to use all of this version information, or rather the service version information, to identify exploits that we can use to exploit these services. And we'll also be taking a look at how to perform web application vulnerability scanning. So I'll see you there.